plugin development. Dan Cox and Brian Duncan are our presenters today, and we are going to cover what plugins are and when you should consider using them. And then we'll start with some of the basics on to help you understand, what they are, and then we'll progress into how to develop them, how to deploy them, and how to test the plugin. So we'll do a live demonstration there. And I anticipate that you will all receive a lot of value from today's session. And we do aim to provide a digital event today that respects all individuals. So we ask that everyone assists in providing a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We bring 3 of these topics to our customers every month. If you've got a topic that you would like us to present on in the future, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and I will get that on the list for the leadership team to consider those in our future schedule. And to minimize any background noise today, we do have the lines muted. So go ahead and use the chat for any questions that you have, and we'll answer those. Also, if we've got time at the end, I'll unmute all the lines and you can ask questions live as well. Additionally, we do send follow-ups with the recording and the deck that is being used today. That email will come from myself, Deb Victor, probably on Monday. You'll get that in your inbox. And if you don't wish to receive those in the future, just go ahead and reply back to me, and I'll take you off that distribution going forward. So with that, I would like to thank Dan and Brian for presenting today on this awesome topic, and I'll hand it over to you guys. Thank you so much. And you
gonna put $1 in the jar. I had myself muted. What a great start. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Obviously the primary discussion is around plugin development and what you can do with Dynamics 365 when it comes to finally reaching that sort of pro code action of developing plugins. Deb, did you want to control the slides, or do I have control over those?
Yeah, you could either share or you can take control, either way.
Okay, let me give that a shot.
Yeah, there you go.
Excellent. All right, so today we're really going to explore expanding Dataverse, right, and Dynamics 365 itself by using plugins. What does that really mean? When does it come into play? And how do you do it? So for starters, I would just want to talk about what we're going to cover today. Now, plugins themselves are a very wide topic. There's a lot of considerations, more so than we could probably cram into today's session. So today we're primarily going to focus on plugins that just impact the regular CRUD operations, right? So your create, retrieve, update, delete. Now there are other possibilities that you should be aware of out there. There are lots of different messages that go back and forth between the Dataverse API and your application. For example, retrieve multiple. If you're not just trying to get a single record, but you want to get multiple records and you want to, let's say, have some filtering and some query expressions built out around that, that's certainly a capability. If you wanted to associate 2 records, that is a separate message that might come into play as well. And then, of course, you can even create your own custom actions. So in the event that the out-of-the-box capabilities don't quite handle the ones that you're looking for, you have the ability to create your own as well. So lots of different capabilities there. We're only going to focus today on really the CRUD operations themselves. All right, so what is a plugin, right? Let's just kind of lay the groundwork for understanding what that really is. And ultimately, it's really custom code, right? It is custom code when you have reached the boundaries, if you will, of what you can kind of create out of the box. Plugins allow you to take advantage of your own coding capabilities, right, within your team to be able to express more complex business logic. You can really extend the capability of Dynamics and Power Platform beyond what it's capable of doing out of the box. Now, those can be triggered in response to particular events. You can actually create those to have them triggered, for example, if a piece of data changes on a record. And you're going to find that how do you build those? Well, the great thing is as for those of you who are sort of pro developers in the crowd, you know that uh, Microsoft focuses on .NET. This is no exception. So what you're going to see today is going to be plugins that are written in C Sharp, but really any .NET compliant language would work there as well. So the big topic here, of course, is we're going to be tying in Visual Studio, right? So Visual Studio is your friend. When you actually go through it and develop C Sharp plugins, we're not asking you to have a different development experience than you would with any other C Sharp development. So you're going to see that for those of you who have used Visual Studio, you should feel right at home with this. So now that we've kind of laid some of the baseline down, let's talk about the execution pipeline, right? So what really happens? Well, there's a few things that we want to get you sort of acclimated to, right? The There are various different steps through the execution pipeline, and we'll look at in just a second where you can plug in there. But there are actions that get taken as a part of committing a change, let's say, to a record. So it's not just that, hey, I say I'm saving this record, Dynamics goes off and does its thing, and then what I get back is what I get back. No, there are actually separate, distinct steps in this execution pipeline, including things like pre-operation, pre-validation, post-operation, and those actually surround the main core operation, which is handled internally by Dynamics itself. Now you can trigger those, and we'll take a look at what's called the plugin registration tool today to kind of understand how those come into play, how you sort of register those plugins and say, this is where I would like to insert my code. Uh, the three different ones that really come into play are pre-validation, pre-operation, and post-operation. So pre-validation, that occurs before any of the platform logic actually occurs. And that is really great because we know that there are cases when you want to be able to validate some piece of your data prior to Dynamics ever kind of getting involved, if you will. And that allows you to not only inspect that, but you can even modify the data that's coming in. So if you had some business case in which you needed to change some piece of data based on some condition, you could do that. And pre-validation is a great step for that. Then pre-operation and post-operation, those are sort of integration points that happen directly before and directly after the actual core operation that gets handled by the platform. All right. So let's just take a look at sort of the life cycle of the execution pipeline. So typically you would have that start off by some way of data submission, right? So if you have modified or created a record inside of Dynamics, you submit that data, and that actually makes its way to the API. And the very first thing that you're going to find is there's that pre-validation step, right? That pre-validation step is really where you have an opportunity before Dynamics or the Power Platform has done anything with your record to be able to express business logic there. You can apply those, but it's not the only place, right? So from there, it's actually going to go to the internal system validation. Now, what's great about that is before any of the validation that we're going to administer on that entity or table to make sure that that looks correct, you have the ability to adjust it as well, right? So then it's handed off to the system validation. And then from there, you'll notice that it's actually going to go off to the pre-operation. So again, before we have even actually committed any of the data to the database. And then finally is going to be the main operation here. That is going to be an internal only action, right? So you don't have an ability to kind of key into the core operation, but you can actually plug into the pre-operation just before that operation happens. And then what's great is even after that data has really been operated on by the platform itself, we still give you the opportunity to have a post-operation action as well. So various different points where you can actually tie in. So when you have your plugin code itself, you can decide where you want that to operate. It can operate at the pre-validation level. It can operate at the pre-operation, and then finally the post-operation as well. All right, so when you're talking about plugins, there's two main types of plugins, right? There's synchronous and asynchronous. Uh, Probably pretty straightforward in terms of understanding what that means. The nice thing about synchronous plugins is that you have the ability to modify that data, but regardless of whether you're in pre-validation, pre-operation, or post-operation, because it is a synchronous plugin, you have the ability to interact with that execution pipeline. And one of the great things is, let's say that you had a couple of different steps that you wanted to go across, and at the end of that, you finally realized, you know what, this doesn't meet my business logic. I really need to be able to cancel that. Well, you can actually, within your plugin, throw an exception. And in the case of synchronous plugins, you are still inside of that transaction, right? So if you decide that you want to throw an exception, because this is all wrapped up inside of a transaction, all of the actions that took place as a part of this all get unraveled automatically. You don't have to go back and say, okay, now I need to delete this related record. I need to delete the main record. That's all handled for you. In the case of asynchronous plugins, what's nice is while you don't have the ability to unroll that transaction because it's asynchronous, what you do have the ability to do is any sort of operation that you want to take that might take a little bit longer and you don't necessarily want to hold up the interaction between the platform and your user, you can allow the asynchronous plugin to run asynchronously. The platform will continue to interact with the user, but you can still take some actions. Now, there are a couple of limitations that you need to consider, right? So, for example, with asynchronous plugins, you're allowed 2 minutes, right? So, we make sure that you can run for up to 2 minutes executing your code. If you don't tidy up within that time, then we will cancel that plugin. But obviously, we don't want to have a situation where you have a plugin that is just sort of caught in an infinite loop, for example. So a couple of vocabulary terms around plugin development. We talked about we talked about the execution pipeline, right? How it's made up of these different stages. We talked about synchronous versus asynchronous, but there's a couple other pieces that come into play. So there are what we call message steps, and that message defines what that action is actually taking. So as we're going to look at today, you have the typical ones, right? The create, update, retrieve, delete. Those are your standard CRUD operations. But you also have the ability to define your own actions as well. And there are tons of other ones that are available within the platform. Uh, and then I'll touch on debugging tools in a minute, but entity images are also very important, right? So as you are coding, you might have a need to want to see sort of the before and after of what that image, what that actual record looked like as it was going through its life cycle. And this is that entity image is what's going to give you the ability to see that. So when it comes to debugging, tracing, and logging, all of those are available within the platform. So you do have the actual ability to hook up Visual Studio and you can actually debug your plugin. You also have the ability to take advantage of logging that is available, as well as the tracing service. And the tracing service, which we'll be able to look at today, gives you the ability to actually put in tracing events throughout so that you can go back and look at that trace log and see exactly what happened. It gives you some great insight on exactly what your plugin is doing as a part of the overall execution pipeline. So let's talk for a minute about when to use plugins, because I think this is probably one of the most crucial sort of points that we would want to drive home to you, right? Uh, because this is a pro code motion, right? Because this requires you to develop code, there is not only going to be some dependency on you, right? You're sort of increasing your sort of tech dependency, if you will. You have some technical debt there that you have to manage, but it's also important to understand when you want to use plugins and when you don't. So when it comes to using plugins, the one thing that is very obvious is when performance is high priority, right? C# is a very performant language, and you have your own libraries. You might have extended business logic that you want to take care of. And so if that logic that you want to express within your code sort of goes beyond the limits of what the platform provides, that's another case where you might want to do it. One of the pieces of advice that we tend to give our customers is you should always look for a low code option first, right? You would be absolutely shocked, and we continue as TSs to see ourselves being shocked at the amount of capabilities that you can express with a low code option, but you may not know that that's available to you, right? So we always encourage people explore what the platform allows you to do from a low code standpoint, before you actually dive into sort of taking on that technical debt, writing a plugin, knowing that there is separate code, whereas a low code option would not only allow you to not take on all that technical debt, but also allow you to typically develop it quicker as well. So next one we'll point out is very complex logic, right? And there's a little star there, a little asterisk. Brian, why don't you tell us about that asterisk? I know you want to be chime in on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So we put the asterisk there because we don't want to get the false impression that very complex logic can't also be done in the low code options. In fact, one of our mantras here at the TS team and SLG is whenever you have a partner or a developer or somebody on your team saying that in order to do something, you absolutely have to write code. It can't hurt to take 5 minutes and send one of your TSs an email because odds are 9 out of 10 times we will probably have a low code or no code option to solve for you. We've seen an awful lot of very creative problem solving scenarios, and you'll be always usually better off to go with that low code option simply from a maintainability perspective. However, keep in mind, sometimes we resort to code because sometimes an hour of configuration, which is indeed configuration, can sometimes be replaced with 5 or 6 lines of code. And that's what you're going to see today. We're going to build a plugin of a very common scenario, and you're going to see very short, very small amount of code for a very valuable type of asset. So that's why we put that asterisk in there. Didn't want you to think that if you have complicated business logic, you can't implement it in the platform as is.
Yep, excellent. Thanks, Brian. So finally, the last point is the one other time when we see plugins getting used, right, is when you reach that point where when it comes to async operations, right, we love Power Automate. Power Automate is very capable. The literal thousands of connectors that are available, in addition to your ability to create your own, there are times, and the cases seem to be more and more rare these days, but there are times when you just feel like you need your particular code. You already have a supported library that your organization is taking advantage of, and you just feel like Power Automate doesn't quite cut it. Then certainly by all means, you have the ability to inject your own code by way of using that async plugin. All right. So additionally, let's talk about when you don't want to use plugins, right? Right off the bat, the one thing that we point out is when workflow is capable, right? So we have capabilities within the platform. We have Power Automate, we have the classic workflow editor. When you have that sort of capability that can handle some of that, you don't want to typically take on creating a plugin for that. Additionally, when that logic can be configured, right? So when you look at all of the capabilities of the platform, you can see a very small list here of things like workflows, business rules, Power Automate, calculated fields, formula fields, any sort of denormalization, even Power FX as well, which we'll point out down at the bottom. These are capabilities that are available to you to really create your own custom logic that is your business logic, right? Sort of very salient and bespoke to your organization, but it's not something that necessarily has to be managed from code. So when we typically look at the platform, we don't just look at it as a no-code platform or a low-code platform or a code first or pro code platform, right? We want to hit this sweet spot with each of those different capabilities because they really are all available to you. Additionally, when do you not want to use plugins, excuse me, when the developer doesn't know how to solve it without code, right? And this goes back to what Brian just mentioned. We are very much interested in your success with the platform, and part of doing these tech series is to try to make you more aware of the capabilities within the platform, right? So we try to hit lots of different topics. That said, at the point at which you have the code, please don't hesitate to reach out to your TS. We will be happy to look at that for you and try to give you some architectural guidance, in the case where you might be able to really easily take advantage of a capability within the platform and not have to delve into code for that. Fourth one here I absolutely love, and that is Canvas apps and custom pages, right? So all too often I do have customers that have this one particular use case and they just need it to perform this particular task. And as they look at it, they're working within a model-driven app and they just can't quite get there. Well, Canvas apps maybe do give you that capability really easily, and custom pages are a great way to be able to take advantage of that even within your model-driven app, right? So custom pages, the way I usually think about it is actually having a Canvas app embedded inside of your model-driven app, right? So anytime when you feel like you need to have that particular experience, consider Canvas or custom pages to be an important way to solve that as well. And then finally, power effects, right? We are seeing power effects becoming more and more prevalent throughout the platform. So if you look at things like formula fields and low code plugins, which we'll talk about in a second, these are all driven using power effects. And we're finding that people are able to much more quickly express business logic and capabilities using power effects than your sort of typical C# or .NET or really any other language pro code sort of course. All right. So let's dive into building plugins in Dataverse, right? What does it take? What do we use? Well, first and foremost, we obviously want you to be aware of the tools and the setup that's required. So there is going to be some development environment set up. You can use Visual Studio. You can use Visual Studio Code. The ones that are bold here are the ones that we're going to be using today, right? So we are going to be using Visual Studio Code 2022. See, I've got a typo there for GitHub. But you also have the CRM Code SDK and the Power Platform tools, right? So we want you to take advantage of these capabilities. Next one you'll notice is the plugin registration tool and the Pack CLI. If anybody was able to attend any of our previous sessions in the tech series, you got to, in the last session, take a look at Pack CLI as it related to Azure DevOps and sort of your application lifecycle management capabilities. And previous to that, we looked at it when it was regarding PCF controls. Well, plugin registration is no different, right? The Pack CLI also exposes capabilities for that as well. In addition, there's the plugin profiler tool. That's a great tool that I think we'll be able to show you a little bit about today as well. And then there's things like CRM Service Util. That is a library that is built in order to allow you to point it at a particular environment, and it will actually look at the metadata and create early bound classes for you. So really great to be able to take advantage of that. And then finally, the last one that I think definitely deserves mention is XRM Toolbox, right? We are always thrilled by the community involvement, and lots of folks in the community have come together to create different tools within the XRM Toolbox. So I encourage you to take a look at that and see if there's something that you can take advantage of there. All right. So when it comes to actually developing the plugin, what does this really require? Well, first and foremost, you're obviously going to develop your plugin code. Now, once you have that plugin code, you want to be able to sort of get that into that execution pipeline that we talked about. And how does that happen? Well, that actually happens by registering that pipeline, or excuse me, that plugin within Dataverse. So you're going to look at it today. We'll show you the plugin registration tool, and you'll see how that sort of action takes place. And then finally, you can imagine that you would typically want to test that, right? Whether you're in a sandbox environment or QA environment. And of course, you want to deploy that to production as well. So let's talk a little bit about today's example. And from here, I'm going to hand it over to Brian. He's going to take you through just how to set the stage for what we're going to look at, and we'll dive right in.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So today's example, we're going to be doing something that I think is a relatively standard request. And it's actually something that we see frequently used for plugins, and it deals with related data. One of the things that our system does very well is it validates not only singular records, but related records that reach out and connect to the data sources and so forth. But sometimes where complexity steps in is when you may have to bring in knowledge or information that spans multiple records. So in this situation, we're going to be showing a child welfare application, and the child welfare application is going to then have multiple family members. So a traditional one-to-many join where we have an application that has many family members. And traditionally, when you go through like a wizard online, what will happen is people will ask you, how many people do you have in your family? And you'll say 5. And then the application will present you with a way to enter 4 or 5 records into the system to ensure that you're providing each of your family members and validate that you are providing everybody, not forgetting them. But in Dynamics or in Dataverse, sometimes that poses a challenge because let's say we have a rule that says if you say you have 4 family members attached to your application, we don't want you to put 5 family members. And likewise, we want to make sure that you've done all of your due diligence and completed the application and hit save to ensure that you do actually represent your family correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to represent that by 2 different Dataverse tables. We're going to have one called the child welfare application, another one called the family member table. Again, joined in a one-to-many join. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a plugin on both tables. If we have time, we'll get to both of them. I think we will. But first on the family member record, whenever we add a new family member record, we're going to want to reach out to that application table. We're going to want to determine how many family members the person said was going to be on the application. Then we're going to want to reach out and query all of the family member records to get a count as to how many are already attached to determine if this new family member record can then be added onto it, right? So if I said that there's 4 members of my family on the application and I'm going to add a 5th family member, I want to throw an error. Very common scenario. And the reason we chose this is we're going to choose our code accordingly because some of the most common requests about how to do things in code are going to be included. Is there a more efficient way to do what I'm about to do? Yes, there's something called reference inclusion in your query where you can include all the related entities in one fell swoop. I'm not going to do that today because I don't want to miss the opportunity to show multiple ways to incorporate your data inside of your plugins. So with that, we're now going to switch over. I'm going to share out my screen. And we should have it now. Did everybody see my screen?
Looks like we see the portal. Yep.
Excellent. So this is a real world application. As you can see, it's a child welfare application, and it goes through several different steps. There's actually 16 steps. I'm not going to bore us with 16 steps. Instead, I'm going to go right into the back end, and I'm actually going to show us, I think I'm going to go in the back end here. Here it is. I'm going to show us what this application looks like directly in the back end of the system, and I'm going to work from here just from a speed perspective because we want to jump right into the code. So in this scenario, I have a child welfare application, and here's my family member information, and I have 1, 2, 3 family members on here, and I have a maximum family member record of 3, and I'm going to clear this out too. You'll see why. And now what I want to do is I just simply want to add a new family member here. So I'm just going to add a new family member, and I've made this very quick so we don't have to worry about coming back and forth. I'm going to hit save and close. And as you can see, the system is going to allow me to save that family member record directly on the application without any issues. And the main reason is because there's no rule preventing me from putting 4 here, even though I've said that there's only 3 people associated with it. So now I want to create logic that goes out and has to involve all these family members, has to involve the record that the family member record is being attached to, and execute that in such a way that if that rule isn't met, it prevents the save from occurring. Welcome to plugins. So I already started off my Visual Studio 2022, and I've also started off my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to bounce between both of them because I know some people are using one, some people are using another. And I want to show you a little bit about the setup that I did. So the first thing to keep in mind is that if you download your Pack CLI, inside of Pack Tool, your plugin registration tool can be fired off. I'll bring it over here. And here's what it looks like. Couple pieces of information. I know a lot of you, and just recently I helped some of our customers working with an MFA issue where multi-factor authentication was getting in the way of their development. I'm going to show you how you can address that with all these tools as well. One of the things that you may want to do is you may want to install what we call our plugin profiler. The plugin profiler is something that you can install directly from this tool as well. The plugin profiler gets installed into the environment that you're working in, and it gives you greater debug capabilities as well. But the first thing I want to do is I want to connect this tool to an environment. Now, if I was to just simply put my username and password in here and say display list of organizations, I'm going to get an error. And the reason I'm going to get an error is because I have multi-factor authentication enabled. So the secret there is leave this blank. Just let the login control go. It's going to open up our automatic MFA wizard control and allow you to leverage MFA to sign in. And then you'll be able to choose your environment. And I'm going to access our licensing environment. This is going to go and load up everything. Now, this plugin registration tool is something that people use very frequently if they're doing everything kind of like roll your own. I want to show this because this is something that a lot of people will use, and I will use this today as well. But I'm also going to show you the easy button where this tool isn't 100% necessary. So while that's loading, I'm going to jump over to our Visual Studio 2022. Now, in advance of this, I also did one thing to Visual Studio to set it up. I'm going to continue without code here. And if I go up to extensions and manage extensions, you'll see that in advance, I downloaded and installed the Power Platform tools for Visual Studio 2022. This tool set is your friend. By installing this in Visual Studio, the ability to not only very quickly generate plugins, but automatically implement the appropriate interfaces and so forth is all brought into your Visual Studio. So it'll help you be able to create your plugins very quickly. We're going to leverage this virtually for the entire component. But the other thing that you could do is if you wanted to, you could just simply go through and start and create a new class library. And if you create a new class library, just note that this is a .NET Framework supported platform. So Dataverse leverages .NET Framework 4.6.2. It'll go up to 4.7. I'm going to use one of the older frameworks, so it spans multiple versions. But you could just spin up a class library and then roll your own. You could implement the interfaces, and then there's a NuGet package that I'll show you how to add to bring all that in. But a much easier way to do all this is to just leverage those Power Platform tools. And I'm going to show you how we've done that. So that Visual Studio Power Platform tool set takes a little while to install. It's already installed on my platform. Now I'm starting from day one and I want to go and I want to create a plugin. I'm going to go up and create a new project. And I'm going to search for Power and I'm going to find Power Platform Solution Template. And when I hit next, this is now going to give me the ability to create a project inside of Visual Studio. And I'm going to call this so that we can find it easily, ABC Tech Series plugins. I'm going to let it create the solution file inside the same directory, which is the common default. And as far as .NET Framework, I'm going to choose .NET Framework 4.6.2. When you set up your Visual Studio, please include some of your older frameworks. You can go back as far as 4.7. You can go as far forward as 4.7.2. I don't know if 4.8 is supported yet, but 4.6.2 supports the greatest number of our Dataverse versions. So I'm going to hit create. And now the wizard that is built into the Power Platform tools for Visual Studio is going to take precedence. And over here on my other screen, you're going to see a couple interfaces. First of all, it's going to see that I already have a connection. If I said no, that same challenge would come up with a user interface. And if I said no, it would pop open. I'd be able to do MFA. So it does support MFA. I'm just going to use the connection as is. And now it's going to ask me, do I want to start from a Dataverse or create a new solution? So I'm going to start from an existing Dataverse. So it's making a live connection into my environment now. Now I want to associate my plugin project with a solution. So this gives me the ability to not only connect to my Dataverse, but create my plugin project inside of that environment. So this is going to take a minute to connect and bring everything in. And that's now going to show me all the things that I have working. Now, I'm going to stop that because I want to show you something else. If I want to, I can create a new solution. And I can simply go through and create a whole new solution inside the environment as well. That is not what we want to do today. We do want to just simply connect to one of the existing solutions. So I just wanted to show that so you can actually start right from scratch. What this is going to do is it's going to go and it's going to query all the solutions that are in there and let me choose from one. So one of the questions that I get asked frequently is, do I have to go into my environment and create everything there? No, your developers can actually initiate their own plugin projects, and it will actually generate a solution file directly inside of your Dynamics environment. While that's connecting, I'm going to go and show my Dynamics/Dataverse environment because we're going to also want to pull some names out. So here's my solution. And as you can see, I currently have no plugin assemblies inside of my solution. And if I go down here, we're going to see we have our childcare application, in which case I want to be able to pull the logical names because it's going to be very important to have the names of the objects we're working with. The childcare application table. And I'm going to need a couple of fields. The fields I'm going to want are going to be the max family members, in which case I'm going to want to pull the logical name from this. And I'm also going to want the family matrix status field. And I'm going to pull the logical name from that. And finally, I'm going to go down to the family member records. And I want to pull the application link from this. And I'm going to explain what all these are here. And there's my application field. I'm going to pull the name from this as well. So you're going to want to get a list of your logical names. I'll talk about type safety as we go. And let's go back and see if I've now got my solutions here. I do. So now I'm going to say I'm logged in and I want to attach this plugin project to my Health and Human Services eligibility solution. And now do I want to bring in existing objects that are already in? So maybe I'm connecting this to my environment for the first time and I want to open up that particular source code and start working on it. In this case, I want to create a new plugin. And now here are my new template projects. I can add a plugin project, a customization product, or a custom workflow activity. I want to choose a plugin project. These other two components are very, very user-friendly as well. Custom workflow activities are very powerful. We're going to do a separate session on them. And now project name, I'm just going to do the same thing, ABC Tech Series plugins. And now this is going to go, it's not only going to create a project, it's going to create a base class for my plugin that all of my new plugins are going to inherit from. And so voila, over to the right, we now get to see that I have a solution called ABC Tech Series plugins. Here are my plugins, and here are my plugin base. And now I can go through and register or start creating plugins. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to want to connect the actual software that I'm writing to my environment. So right now my Visual Studio is connected so I can work with the project. But what I really want to do is I now want to activate this Power Platform Explorer so that I can use some of the wizards built into the tools to create a plugin. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my tools and say connect to a Dataverse. And now this is a little bit different than before. Before we connected Visual Studio just to set up our project and get our project working. Now I actually want to make my project work with the objects inside of Dataverse. So I'm going to use that same connection. And this connection sometimes takes a few minutes to bring things in. And while we're doing that, here are the logical names that I just connected to. So here's the table we're working with. And here are the two fields on the application table I'm going to want to work with. And here's the field on the family member table I want to work with. The idea of the plugin is going to be when somebody adds a new family member record, I want to, through the application link, reach back to the application, get the number of family members that should be there, query the full table, and then come back. Now I just need to do a little moving of, oops, not that, of this. There we go. Once again, attached to my eligibility solution. And now my Power Platform Explorer is going to go out and connect and bring in all of my objects. Now, why is it doing that? Because I want to create a plugin for my family member table. I also want to create a plugin for my application table. Now, while I could go just create a new class and implement the plugin base manually, what this is going to do is it's going to give me a wizard specifically for implementing that and give me the ability to instantly start writing logic code. Because of the environment that I'm connected to, there's a lot of objects in here. This initial connection may take a few minutes, but that's okay. Once it's loaded, it's pretty much ready to go for the rest of the time. If, by the way, you are not leveraging the Visual Studio tools, when you create a new class, you'll get this C# class. You can right click on there and there is a NuGet package manager. You can go into there and bring in the core Dataverse SDK, CRM SDK, and that will implement the same exact plugin interface that we're having. So now here comes all of my objects. And now I'm going to scroll down and find our family member table. So as I scroll down, you're going to see eApp, and here are all the tables in my system. Here is my family member. I'm going to right click on this and say create plugin. And just like before, This is, there we go. This is going to give me the ability to now attach a plugin to the create event. These are the events, the pipelines that Daniel was talking about. I want to create a plugin. I'm going to want this to be on the pre-operation stage. And since this is on the create, I don't need to do this on a filter. Filtering attributes allow you to trigger this when certain fields are changed. I don't need that. And I want this to be synchronous. I want this to happen the moment that somebody hits save. And now I'm going to register that plugin. And now over to my right, my solution is going to open up. And there I am, my family member create. I now have implemented the plugin base. All of this code is boilerplate code. And as I go on here, the execute CDS plugin is the function that I need. So now let's begin our pseudocode. So what is our pseudocode? Well, here's what we're going to want to do. I mapped this out for us. We're going to want to get the family member record. Oops, let me undo that. So we're going to want to get the family member record. So here is, I'm going to bring this over to our notepad. We're going to want to get the family member record. We're going to want to check to see if it is being attached to an existing application. We want to get the lookup reference to the parent application in order to get the number of max fields. And then we want to query all of the family member records to ensure that we have all the right numbers, and then validate that the number is correct before either throwing an error or allowing the save to occur. So let's get started. So this is where we're going to implement this. I'm going to show you a couple little tricks that I like to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define a string called string step. I'm going to call this initialize. What this is going to do is it's just something I do from a debugging perspective. If something goes wrong, it'll allow me to come back through and see where something went wrong. So I now have this variable called string step. And now down here, I have where I'm going to start writing all my code. And so the first couple of things I'm going to write are I want to get the family member record that this plugin is executing on. So in order to do that, I am going to define my entity, my fam member as, and I'm going to call the context. Because we're using the Visual Studio Tools wizard, it's already created our local context, it's already created our tracing service, and it's already created our service factory. These are the objects that are needed to work with our organization service and our object service inside of Dataverse to do things like check who's executing this, where are they executing it from, what are the business rules, and what are the object models associated with it. So here I'm going to say, let's define a family member, and the family member then is going to be within the context of the execution of the plugin. It's going to be the input parameters, and the input parameter comes with something called target. The T is case sensitive. You can't put small t. It does have to be little t. And I just realized I got to cast this as an entity. Voila. All right, so now I have my family member, and now I'm just going to put a quick little string step here. Fam member retrieved. As you see, what I'm using as a little trace to see what's happening in my system. So the next thing I want to do is I want to see if the family member is being attached to an application. Maybe these family member records can be created without attached to an application. So a very quick check. I'm going to say if the fam member record, I'm going to use the auto help in Visual Studio. One of the best things about Visual Studio is very good at helping you code. And I'm going to say if it contains, and the field name that we had is BDM application. In other words, that's the name of the lookup field that points to the application. So I'm adding a family member to the application. I need to see if there is an application being associated with this. So if it doesn't contain an application, then very simply just exit out of the plugin. We don't need to validate this because there's nothing to validate. So I'm just going to say string step. Now I'm going to say fam member had application. So if it gets to this step, we know they had an application. Next, I now want to go and get the application associated with that. So we now know that there has to be, in this line of the code, there has to be an application. So there's something in our code objects called the entity reference. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say entity reference, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a reference to another entity in our system. And yes, we do use the old naming conventions inside of our object model of entities instead of tables. So I'm going to say entity reference fam member application. An entity reference, for lack of a better term, is the object and all of the properties surrounding a lookup field. And that's what I want. I want the reference to the application. So this is going to be based upon the fam member record dot get attribute. And this attribute I already got, actually I got to convert it to an entity, cast it to an entity reference. And the attribute name is, what did I say it was? BDM application. Very good. And I think if I casted all that right, everything looks good. I have 2 equal signs there. That's not going to be good. There. So now I have an entity reference. That is basically the lookup field. I have all properties associated with that lookup field using that. Now with that, I can get the application. So entity application is going to equal to. So now I need to go and say, I'm going to do something to show you how you can get records inside of our object. You can get any records inside the object model. So because this Visual Studio Tools already generated the context in our service objects, I can now call out to get the objects of the data from here. So I'm just going to call the current user service, which is, again, defined up at the top here. You'll see it up here. Current user service and the context, those are all predefined for us. That's why that Visual Studio Tools is a lovely device. So I'm going to say current user service and then the retrieve option, which is exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to retrieve the BDM application, and the parameters included here say, well, what is the GUID? Well, because I have that reference, fam member application, I have the .id, and then whenever you do a retrieve, you can define what you're retrieving. For efficiency, you don't necessarily want to retrieve 1,000 records. You may only want to retrieve a few fields. So in this case, I'm just going to say new column set as it's defined. And by doing that, I'm going to see that I'm going to also want to then, instead of having to define this every time, I'm going to inherit that as well, implement that interface. That way I don't have to type that every time. So now using Microsoft SDK query, that looks right. I should be able to come down here and remove all of this. And I could put the names of the columns that I wanted to retrieve, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to say true. And that's going to retrieve all of them, which is fine for now because we're looking to do this. So now application is retrieved. So now I want to check to see what number did they put on that application. So now that I have the application object, I can just simply see if the application contains, and now the field name is called BDM max family member. And so if it contains it, so they did enter a max value number, and the application get attribute value, and we're going to now get the value of it. I'm going to cast it to an integer because I believe it's a number field. I'm going to say, what is the name of it? It is, oops. You just look at the name of the field. It is up there. It is BDM max family member. Greater than 1. All right, so now what I'm saying is if that application has a maximum family member value and it's greater than 1, so now we know that we do have something to validate. So what I'm saying is I'm adding the family member. I'm saying, does it have an application attached? It does. Does the application tell us how many family members should be on it? Here I'm saying it does. So now I'm going to say string step max number exists, and that is a misspelling. That's okay. Moving right along. So now that it has a number, I need to know how many family members already exist on the application. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a query object, because this is another object that is very commonly used. It's called a query, and it's called a query expression. And so a query expression inside of plugins do exactly what you're thinking. It allows us to define a list of records that we want to return, and it's done by just defining what table we want to return. So here it is. I want to create an expression, a query that returns family members. And I'm going to say query defined. And now we need to add conditions. So the query is going to have what we call criteria. And you can add conditions to those criteria. And this is going to be what we call a condition expression. Again, notice Visual Studio is helping me along the way. And the condition expression is going to do just that. It's going to say, well, what is the condition expression? In this case, I'm going to say where the application field. So I want all of the family records that have the same application. This is the name of the application ID. And the condition operator is case sensitive as well. Condition operator equal. And now I want to say, bring the application ID from the application table. And I think all that works. All right, so here's what we did. We said define a query of family member records. Now add criteria to that query where we're saying go out and say get all family members where the application ID is equal to the application ID that we're attaching this to. So this should return all the family member records. And once again, just in case something goes wrong, expression defined. Now we got to determine what particular fields we want to have returned. And once again, I'm not going to define a specific column set because I don't know all the names of the fields off the top of the head. So I'm just going to say true, which returns them all. Not the most efficient. You should define your column set for the bare minimum that will increase the speed. And once again, column set defined. And now we're just going to say, get the results. And now, once again, we're going to call that current user service. But now, instead of just simply retrieve, we're going to retrieve multiple. And we're going to send our query object in. And I'm just going to copy and paste. Results defined. And we're just going to do a quick check. If then results dot entities, which are the objects that got returned, count is greater than 0. That means records came back. Instead, I'm going to say if the count is greater than or equal to the application BDM max family members. And this needs to be cast to an integer as well. Now, let me just check my fields. I think I got my field names wrong here. BDM fax max family members. There it is. Yes. So this one up here needs to be family members as well. Let me just verify that that is the name. And it's max family members. Yes, the S is necessary. Good. So if results, voila. Then that means there are too many on here, and I'm just going to throw a new, and what you should always throw is an invalid plugin exception. And the message is going to be too many family members. Now I could do other logic here. Just for time, I'm going to go down here, and where this execution gets thrown, I'm just going to do a string step, and I'm going to remove this message here. I'm just going to put the exception message for whatever exception gets thrown. And now if something goes wrong when I compile this, and I just went to VB's, I'll see where the thing went wrong. So the whole reason I put that string step along there is because whenever something goes wrong, in the exception that gets thrown, it's going to tell me what line of code went wrong on it. So if I did any typos during this, we'll find out pretty quickly. Like for instance, I can already see family member 2. I'm going to do family members. So now, because I have Visual Studio connected live, it should be as simple as right-clicking on this now. I do need to sign the class. So don't forget to go to signing and sign the assembly with a strong key. I'm just going to call this test key, and I'm not going to password protect it. It's a one-time thing. And now my entire project is signed. I should be able to build this. And everything was built successfully. And now I should be able to deploy it. Directly from Visual Studio, I can deploy now into the Dataverse. This will come back and tell me exactly when it's deployed. And that means I now have a working function inside of my Visual Studio project. And if I go into my plugin registration tool and hit refresh, I should be able to see it here. It should show up right at the top, ABC, my solution name, meaning I've now compiled this logic. I've put it in on the family member record so that when I hit save, it will step in and intercept this. But there's one additional step, and I wanted to leave this to show you that in case I didn't want to use Visual Studio tools, this tool here will allow me to compile virtually anything into the Dataverse manually. This is a tool that a lot of people use, they're very familiar with, and they prefer to roll their own, so to speak, and then migrate it in. As you can see, you can register things directly through here. You can unregister through here. You can install the profiler tool, which this was already installed on this environment, which gives me the ability to see what's happening inside the code. And as soon as this gets refreshed, I should have, there it is, ABC. And the last thing I want to do, I'm going to save. I'm going to show you. If I want to, I could also register a step right through here the same way, where I attach this code now to the create event. The primary entity. So same exact thing I did in Visual Studio, I can do it here. Pre-operation, synchronous, all that's good. Register new step. So depending upon what tool I want to use, it's the same on either side. Now I should be able to go back to my solution, and let's see what happens. I have 4 records, and I have max family members of 3. If I say new family member now, and I choose this, and choose save, and I hit save, let's see what happens. Family member application, the entity with the name BDM application with the name mapping logical was not found. So that means I have an issue, but if I download my log file, I already know it's a naming issue, and it'll show me right here. BDM application with name mapping logical was not found. I know what that is. I'm going to go right to my code. Family member contains. This is childcare. So this is this. It's here. The name of my name of my table is called childcare application. So that's all that was. I should be able to now instantly save this, build it, and deploy it. Now you might notice that I'm having to put the text names of things, which is always a cause of issue. So yes, type safety is not included in this particular type of implementation. However, as Daniel mentioned, you can use our service utility to generate a type safe class, which will indeed do just that. So if you look, now it says too many family members, which is exactly what I wanted. It also put my step in there. So now I would go back into my solution, I would remove that, but that's exactly what we just did. So now if I say, let's change this to 7 family members and hit save. Now if I say new family member and I choose it and I hit save, it'll go into the system without an error. So we just implemented validation in a very quick manner on the family member. To follow up with this, I would then add a similar plugin to applications, which validates on the application side when somebody changes the max family members. So we got all the way through. We got a successful plugin executed. We got to see some of the debugging steps and some of the methodology along the way, some of the object model and techniques for getting records, getting queries, and solving for complex business logic. Daniel, I think we did that in pretty record time. I hope everybody got something out of this, and I know we did it pretty fast due to the amount of the volume of information we needed. But hopefully you can play it back on replay, go through slowly, and step by step learn how to be able to create plugins and add advanced logic into your system.
Fantastic. Nice job. I'm going to stop the recording. Do you guys have time for a